Welcome to the CrossKnowledge podcast. Here we discuss the trends, opportunities, and challenges of corporate digital learning. Let's meet today's host.
Hello everyone, and welcome back to another exciting episode of the CrossKnowledge podcast. I am Magali and I'll be your host today. The Human Advantage is a series of the CrossKnowledge podcast where we explore the pivotal role of humans in driving organizational success. The idea is to hold candid conversations with business leaders and experts who have demonstrated a deep commitment to fostering a more human workplace. Today, we have the pleasure of welcoming Jocelyn Phelps, Program Director, Leadership and Organization Development at Société Générale, one of Europe's leading banks and a major player in the economy. Jocelyn has been instrumental in creating and facilitating co-development groups, a method that has supported hundreds of leaders in enhancing their skills and navigating complex challenges. Her success in convincing senior leaders to dedicate time to these programs has strengthened the leadership culture at Société Générale. As a result, leaders are now more actively engaged in personal and team growth, improving collaboration and embracing innovative management approaches. Besides her work with co-development, Jocelyn has led multiple initiatives to strengthen Société Générale performance culture, with a particular focus on behavioral skills and leadership models. She has also run programs to prepare future leaders for the next responsibilities, including leading Société Générale agencies in Europe and Africa. In this episode, we'll discover how to build high-impact learning communities that ignite transformation and drive organizational success. Jocelyn, it's a great pleasure to have you on our podcast.
Maggie, it's a pleasure to be with you today. And I think I would just add one thing to get it out of the way as we start. Of course, all the ideas that I'm sharing with you here today are my ideas and don't necessarily represent any policies of Société Générale. But I'm very glad to be able to share my experience with you.
Great. Can you start by telling us a bit more about your background and what led you to your current role at Société Générale?
Well, as you can hear, I'm an American in Paris. I'm an American in Europe. I've been here for many years, and I really was bitten by the international bug. So I have worked recently across Europe and across Africa, and in previous roles, also with Asia and with North America. Maybe my most basic background, I should point out, is actually in literature and languages. So that's always given me a kind of a translator's role, right? Trying to make the connections between things, trying to figure out how different people need to hear things and receive them in order to be able to take them on board. I really got involved in leadership and organization development after my business school experience. And began working with a whole set of tools that really showed me that you can make an organization function really highly or become really dysfunctional based upon what you do with the human element. So that human piece is so fundamental. The way you work with individuals, the way you work with teams, the way you work with departments. And that's one thing that brought me to Société Générale, was that there were real opportunities here to do that kind of work. And so I worked across the spectrum of leadership and organization development, everything from performance management to coaching, from culture change to talent management, work with leadership frameworks, as we've said. So it's been a quite varied path. And I guess that also means that there are many, many ways, including learning communities, to tackle this question of how we create a more human organization.
Personally, what I like about learning communities is how much they foster connections and reinforce engagement. What are the biggest challenges you've faced in keeping learning communities effective and engaged? And how have you addressed these challenges?
I think the nature of the challenges have changed over time. In an earlier phase, I would have said that the big challenge was actually convincing leaders and sponsors that this approach of a learning community that would be empowered to work on an issue or to work towards a goal or simply to work on its own development, that this community could be empowered without necessarily having strong hierarchical oversight, without necessarily having really, really clear frameworks or a really clear agenda. That was kind of surprising. Organizations tend to like structure and they like to know what's going to happen. And with a learning community, you need some structure, but you don't always know what's going to happen. So I think that was perhaps, earlier on, that was the issue. What I find today is that the real challenge is that organizations are under such pressure, and individuals and teams are under such pressure because of transformation, because of the demands of their time, because of the complexity of hybrid working, that it really takes a strong commitment, both from the sponsor and from the members of the community, to say, we're going to set time aside to do this. They all know intellectually that this is what's going to help them move forward, but taking that time out of their days or their weeks is, I think in a way, it's maybe the biggest symptom, but it's definitely the challenge that we have to overcome.
Mm-hmm. Something that I find really interesting too is the way learning community get all the employees on the same page of the corporate strategy. Another question I have is, based on your experience, what are the key steps for building a successful learning community?
I think you've made an important point when you talk about the strategy and getting employees on the same page. If you want to launch a community, the first thing to think about is what kind of sponsorship do you need to make it work? I've worked on communities that were sponsored by HR, and that was fine because HR really clearly knew where this community sat as part of its HR strategy. I worked on communities that were sponsored by management or by leadership because they knew that they had a certain goal and wanted to move towards that goal. But the important thing is to have a sense of what your ambitions are and, in a sense, who we're working for. Right? I think the next question is, who do you want in this community? You may start your community because you are actually targeting a certain group. Maybe you have a population of talented or high potential individuals you want to work with them. You may start a community because you have a certain leadership challenge. You need to get people thinking about that challenge. But there's this question of, who is in this community, and also how flexible am I about letting people join the community along the way? Because people want to know why they're there. They know what they get from it, but they also want to know why somebody else thinks they should be there. And then we mentioned earlier this question of structure. You do need some kind of structure. How is this community going to meet? Does it have a given lifespan? Is it expected to deliver something at some point? So will it be a community that's entirely virtual, or will it be hybrid, where people have a chance to meet together? These are all really important considerations because to some extent they're going to determine how you shape the life of the community. And then I think too, there's always a question of resources. And I've run communities with really, really minimal resources, but if nothing else, management time, the time of leadership to come and speak to members of the community, that's a resource, and you have to know how much access you have to that resource. And then I think there's something about, you have to think about beginnings and endings. How do you start this community so that people get the full sense of what's expected? And as I said, so that people can really mobilize, their intellect, but also their excitement, their enthusiasm, and of course their energy to move things forward. How do you launch that? And then when the work of the community is done, how do you wrap it up appropriately so that people don't feel as though they've been sort of left hanging, or as if they didn't get answers to their questions, or were unable to close off this really interesting chapter which they've been through? I think those are perhaps important. I would say those are the important steps. All the rest depends upon what kind of objective you're pursuing as your community.
Definitely. And also, only self-paced learning doesn't generate enough engagement, doesn't engage enough, because people are isolated. It doesn't allow for community creation. So that's another point we've noticed throughout our project with various clients. Could you share with us a specific example of how learning communities have positively impacted leadership development or team performance at Société Générale?
I could take an early example. This was one of the first learning communities that I worked on. Our challenge was that we had a group of talents, people who were identified as being critical to the organization today and potentially capable of taking on much bigger and more important roles in the future. And the challenge was that these people had the sense somehow that they were important to the organization, but we were in a phase where we couldn't, show them a whole lot of signs. Like there was not a whole lot of leeway for either for reward or for fancy programs or things like that. And so the challenge that we had was, how do we show these people that they're important, and how do we give them a chance to keep on growing? And we were fortunate because we had a limited geographical scope. So we said, listen, if we can just have budget to bring these people together, we're going to make a bet, which is that leadership can come and just spend time with these people. Not say, you're the future of the organization, but just spend time with them, talk to them about where the organization wants to go. And then what we will do is give them a chance to think about that, but also to work on themselves and to work with each other. And so, you were talking about the importance of engagement and how self-paced learning is not enough. What you manage to create with that kind of structure is you have not only a sort of a hierarchical, two-way commitment, that is to say, leadership, senior management is spending time with these people, and they are able to get a better understanding of the strategy and where the organization is going. And among the people in that group, in that leadership team, in that learning community, each individual is able to learn, and they're able to help each other to learn. One of the questions you asked was about the impact of this community. And what I found very interesting was the feedback we had from HR was that they were seeing or capturing a lot lower level of signals that people might be willing to leave. So people were accepting to stay, they were accepting to move into new roles. And I think that that's, in a sense, you create a learning community. These people got connected together, and when we checked back later on, we saw that they were still staying in contact even after the end actually closed off the learning community. And I think that was an interesting impact. What if a significant proportion of these people had left the organization, and instead they stayed. They had grown as individuals. They had made contacts. They had learned things about themselves and about the organization. So I think that's definitely a sign of positive impact of the learning community.
Yeah, the word impact is really important. Bolloré Group, one of our clients, got an award by implementing this strategy of learning community by creating a finance academy. And they saw a peak of engagement that was really high. And the concept of a challenge-based approach is also a good way of engaging a community. During our discussion, you also mentioned co-development groups during our preparation call. Can you explain what co-development groups are and how they fit with the broader concept of learning communities at Société Générale?
Yes. Maybe I should just point out that we talk a lot in the Francophone world about co-development. Anglo-Saxons may talk about peer coaching or sometimes action learning. These are all close cousins. Co-development is based on the idea that a group of people, a small group of people, can come together and they can decide that they are going to learn from each other, to help each other solve problems and challenges, and above all, to grow as individuals in facing the challenges they have in their work. So this is something that we've been using in Société Générale Group, I would say for about 15 years at least. And it started as a small project, as sort of a test, with the idea that rather than bringing in outside facilitators, we could actually develop this skill inside, and that would bring something different to the facilitation of these groups. And now at the point where we have, I actually trained co-development facilitators, and over the years we've formed a couple of hundred facilitators. We certainly run hundreds of groups. And we have used co-development, which in some ways it's a problem-solving methodology, but it goes deeper because it actually looks at the individual facing this question. So there's a reflexive part that strengthens the learning. And we have used co-development as a way to bridge the gap between management training and management practice. We've used co-development as a culture change tool. How do you get people to actually wrestle with the issues of a new culture? We have used it as a way of supporting people during times of transformation. How are managers actually dealing with the challenges that come up during a major change in the organization, be it structure or strategy? And it has surprising effects. Somebody, not in Société Générale, in another organization, said, I can't tell you what happens in a co-development group, but I can tell you when a manager has worked in the co-development group, because he or she does not ask questions in the same way and does not listen in the same way as other managers. There's a different quality to it.
That's really interesting what you say about the feedback from the team itself. What we see is that we learn better in group too. We can share. For instance, I can get inspired what you say and think about something that can lead to other ideas. As we usually say, alone I go faster, together we go further. To conclude, what advice would you give to someone who is interested in creating a learning community within their organization?
Well, I would say that the starting point is think about what you want to achieve with this learning community. And make sure it's an ambitious enough goal. If you get focused on, what are going to be specific outputs, it may be a little bit disappointing. But if you can have a high enough goal, then you can probably go very far. I would say that then you have the obvious considerations about, who is going to support this? Who is going to tell people it's worth your taking time out of your incredibly busy day or your incredibly busy week to stop and to think and to reflect with others and to have them give you feedback. And that's true of any learning community, right? Or it's worth your taking time to address this project, which may not come to fruition right away, which may only sort of stimulate the organization's thinking. But it's worth taking time for that. So you need to have that sponsorship clear. Then, as I said, there's some thinking about who are you going to include in this community, and how are you going to explain to these people, how are you going to communicate to them why they're in this community. And then I would say that we've already talked about structure and so on. I think the most important thing is to have this core conviction that something special is going to happen when you bring people together and give them the frame and then say, you are now empowered to learn together, to work together towards this goal. And that also includes accepting that things may not go exactly in the direction that you want. But I think that's that belief that bringing people together and really giving them permission to work together, and some support also so that they work together effectively. Maybe another criteria is a really important factor is you have to have the conviction that if people can learn to trust each other, that they will be able to do amazing things. And trust is so eroded in our organizations and perhaps in other parts of society as well. So if you can create a space where people can find trust and build trust, it becomes really precious. I think that's what my advice would be to anybody who wants to start off on this adventure.
That's a very good conclusion to our podcast. A big thank you, Jocelyn, for being with us for this episode of our podcast, and see you all very soon. Thank you.
Thank you for joining us today. We hope to see you again for the next episode of the CrossKnowledge podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, please share it with your friends and colleagues.